parents are an essential stakeholder in the soccer experience, the football experience, the sporting experience of children. And we're trying to drive parents to be more curious and to learn so that a lot of the negative behaviors, the irrational behaviors, the distracting behaviors that we see too often from parents can actually be mitigated and changed if parents are curious and seek education and are educated. The role of the parent is to be involved and is to be a part of the sporting experience by seeking education and showing up in a way that they can support their child.
Welcome to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. My name's Tom Hartley, and today's guest is the fantastic Skye Eddy, founder of Soccer Parenting, former footballer, coach and coach developer. Skye now works globally with clubs, leagues and football federations on parent engagement. I'm sure there are so many of you listening to this podcast who occasionally find yourself frustrated when you're working with parents, or maybe you're just unsure on how to handle the relationship. It occurs in so many conversations that I find myself having with coaches. So this episode will genuinely help. It's not often I find myself talking to somebody where I just encounter so many fresh and new and different ideas. We talk about the parent and coach relationship, how clarity just supports and helps everybody, as well as clear boundaries and good communication. We talk about sideline behavior, are parents being supportive or distractive or hostile? Most parents think they're helping. So how can we help them build some self-awareness about if they're being helpful or not? Talk about small actions coaches can take, learning the first names of parents, creating opportunities for dialogue, and maybe some door closed boundaries, which Skye talks about in the conversation. And we talk a bit about some of those unseen moments, car journeys before and after training, how you could run a brilliant coaching session, process-driven, all about the effort, and then some of that could get unpicked on the way home. So how can we work with that and harness the passion of the parents and work in partnership with them? So this is a really important episode, I think, for coaches, because parents can be a cause of stress, but actually by reframing the relationship, we can think about how can we make coaching more enjoyable, easier, better for everybody. There's some ideas in here about helping coaches build trust and community and ultimately improve the experience for all the players that they're coaching. This episode is grounded in real experience and research, and I think you'll want to listen to some of this again and again. Okay, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Skye Eddy. Skye, tell us, where did your journey into sport begin and what drew you into working particularly with football parents or sports parents?
Yeah, well, my work with sport or my connection to sport began for me as a young child. So, this has always been something that has played a big role in my life. And I founded Soccer Parenting because with my experiences as an athlete, as a former professional player, as an active coach, a coach developer, all of these things were coming together. And as my kids were coming up in playing football, I had some real challenges in how I was showing up for them. And I knew that with my extensive background in the game, and I consider myself to be a good parent, like if this was so hard for me with my understanding of the game and coaching and how kids learn, that it was also really hard for other parents. So that was part of it. And the other part of it was my feeling of disconnection to the coaches in my kids' lives because of the nuance of the confusion in the coach-parent relationship. And so really aimed to double down on better explaining and educating coaches and parents around what a really effective coach-parent relationship can look like with the end result of inspiring players. So that's where it all began with my kids.
Brilliant. And do your kids still play sport?
That's such a great question. So my son is 22. He's in college and he plays ultimate frisbee for the club at the college. Sport. Really, I was just talking about him earlier at an event where I was a couple weeks ago and talking about how I don't think he'd still be active and going to the gym sometimes and doing all that if he hadn't been afforded the chance to keep playing football growing up. So he's played at a recreational level So I love the fact that he's still active. And my daughter is still very, very active. She's a high performance player. She played in college. She now works professionally in Major League Soccer for the Columbus Crew. She's their manager of youth programming and coaches kids now. She is still an active player, plays indoors, still showing me her scars and everything from her playing. So I love the fact that my kids are still involved in the game.
Awesome. That's great. Well, that's a great metric for the success of how much they enjoyed youth sport.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it really started with my daughter quitting soccer. When I started soccer parenting is when Callie quit. And then my journey and educating myself and doing all these interviews that I've done and really creating this platform, was part of Callie's journey back to football. And then her really fulfilling and finding her potential. I don't think that would have happened if I hadn't doubled down and really sought this education and support.
So if we cast our mind back to when you were taking Callie and your own experience as an athlete, what were the things that you were noticing happening on the sideline, in the club? And you mentioned earlier that disconnect between coaches and parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what really struck me is a story around my daughter wasn't enthusiastic in her football. She would get in the car after training and be bored and say, oh, we did the same thing again. And when I went to observe her training, because at that point I had just been dropping her off, and I had been her coach previous to this, but this was her first sort of more professional paid academy, if you will, to use your vernacular in the UK situation. And I could see why she was bored. It wasn't really conducive to young children and to helping them be enthusiastic about the game. And I didn't have a voice, Tom. Like I went to the club to talk to the club leader. At this point, I'm like coaching at a really high level with our youth national team programs and had offered to help. I was looked at as if I was just a real irrational parent that was frustrated with my daughter's playing time. And I had no agency in the space for my child. And so that was a really key moment for me around wanting to improve that relationship, because I knew that I was a level-headed parent and I just really wanted to help. And I didn't have a place to do that because of the lack of confidence, the lack of trust that this leader that I was speaking to had in himself. And so really diving into those dynamics is a lot of the work I'm doing now with the coach developers and trusting themselves and creating community. And that type of work is really translated into the work I'm doing now.
I notice when I'm out and about with coaches that so many of them are stretched, regardless of whatever level of the sport or the game. There's an increasing list of demands on coaches' shoulders, and they're busy people, sometimes time poor as well. So why is it so important that coaches should invest time in working alongside parents when they're already really busy?
Yeah, well, what we hear from coaches in surveys and in different studies that have been done is that coaches are leaving the game, and even information from the UK is supporting this, is that coaches are leaving the game because of the stress they feel with parents. And I believe, and we believe at Soccer Parenting, that a lot of that stress that coaches feel is because they aren't engaging parents and because they aren't attempting to establish clear boundaries with parents. And so the nuance, the untalked about stress that happens just kind of grows and gets bigger. And that stress is what eventually causes coaches, unfortunately, to leave the game, or causes them to have a lot of stress and to feel like there's too much on their plate. But if we can align the focus of the coaches and the parents around the supporting structure of our children, then actually it becomes easier for coaches. Having that alignment, having that sense of optimism around the conversations with the parents, these types of things are possible so that we can reframe the role of the parent in youth sports, and a coach can walk into a situation with a new team and actually feel a partnership and support from the parents, which will actually help them and also help them when they're stretched so thin. I do think that part of our work around sense of community and creating community on teams is around engaging with the parents with really clear boundaries and appropriate ways, but helping parents be more involved in a way that makes the life of the coach easier. So I do think that we need to pause and say, what we're doing is not working a lot. How can we actually really do things differently? What questions should we be asking, to sort of frame it the way our friend Mark O'Sullivan says things sometimes? I think he says we're all looking for solutions, but we need to be asking better questions. And so that's really what we're doing at Soccer Parenting is questioning this coach-parent relationship and how it can be most effective.
So I'm going to ask you the $60 million question, which geez. I fully appreciate has no straightforward answer. There's no silver bullet. I'm not naive enough to think that there would be one. But if we're reframing, what is the role of parents in youth sport?
Yeah, I think at Soccer Parenting, we believe that parents are an essential stakeholder in the soccer experience, the football experience, the sporting experience of children. And we're trying to drive parents to be more curious and to learn, so that a lot of the negative behaviors, the irrational behaviors, the distracting behaviors that we see too often from parents can actually be mitigated and changed if parents are curious and seek education and are educated. So the role of the parent is to be involved and is to be a part of the sporting experience by seeking education and showing up in a way that they can support their child. Parents are uniquely positioned to support children when it comes to their athletic potential, when it comes to their mental side of the game. And so really trying to resource parents there. I think that we believe that level-headed parents and like-minded coaches, when they come together with very clear boundaries, which I know I've said a few times already, that will inspire players. So parents are part of the youth sporting experience for kids to help kids feel inspired. It's that simple.
I was going to ask, actually, when you get that alignment and the clear boundaries, you said optimism earlier as well, what changes for the kids?
The science and the research is really clear on that is when there is a stronger sense of community within an organization. If you look at some of the research from McMillan and Chavez around sense of community theory in 1983, that defines community. And then there have been really interesting follow-up studies with Dr. Eric Legg of Arizona State in even looking at football teams and what parents need to feel a sense of community, and seeing the resulting sense of connection and inspiration that kids feel as a result of there being a sense of community. So, there's a really clear correlation between the work that we're doing resulting in kids sticking with sport longer. If you also think about parent engagement, and there's so much research on parent engagement in schools and what the results are of effective parent engagement programming in school systems. And so schools that have effective parent engagement, kids in those schools complete their homework. They don't drop out of school. They score higher in tests. They have a stronger sense of self-belief. Schools that have effective parent engagement programs, which aren't difficult, they're just in place and intentional with the parent engagement, the teachers at those schools are more satisfied and the parents are empathetic. So if we can look at those 6 criteria, I think I just mentioned around 6 of them, and we can translate that into a football club or into youth sports and think this is something that could help kids stick with sport longer, have higher self-belief, train on their own, have parents be more empathetic and coaches be satisfied. That's the aim of the work that I'm doing at Soccer Parenting, is to bring that type of change into youth sports. And so there's a direct translation to player development and player enjoyment.
I'm sure every single coach listening to this conversation is thinking, yeah, I'm in. I want some of this.
Yeah.
This is exactly what I need in my club and in my environment. And we mentioned earlier that coaches are busy, but from a practical perspective, if you've got coaches listening to this thinking, right, I've got all the energy to make this work, to really reframe and work closely with the parents, engage them. I can understand entirely what you're saying, how that would support the connection that the children feel, how inspired they are, that they keep coming back. But for the everyday coach listening, what do they do when they turn off this podcast? What do they do next to get the ball rolling and make a start?
Yeah. The first thing I'd encourage coaches to do, I do a lot of coach education around this, is I would ask the coaches listening to spend some time and reflect around what their biases are about parents. I often ask the question, what do you believe to be true about youth football parents or youth sports parents? And I think that coaches need to be honest with that and be honest around, oh yeah, I actually have a lot of bias and I do think they're all irrational. And I do have a lot of like predetermined ideas, or I've had or I have a handful of negative experiences that have really impacted the way I view all parents, or I get really, really stressed when I have to interact with parents and I avoid that. So I think that's where we need to start, is just a real understanding around level setting the playing field about where you're starting as far as this is concerned. And I think one of the most important things that coaches can do is 2 key things to make it really simple. One, get to know the first names of all the parents on your team. It's as simple as a demonstration of respect, and that really will work to establish trust. And big picture, Tom, that's what we're doing, is establishing trust in the coach-parent relationship. I've done a lot of research on trust. I speak about trust. I keynote on trust and trust in youth sports and how we can help build and facilitate that more. And so I would say a great way, the coaches listening, is get to know the first names. And for me, when I'm coaching, that's hard for me because I'm not great with names. And I literally make flashcards. I have the child's name on the front, the parent's name on the back, and I test myself on it so that I really make sure I know it, because it makes such a difference to get out of our car and be able to say, hey, good morning, Tom. How's it going? Hope you're having a great day, instead of putting our head down, ignoring the parent and going to training or to the match. So that would be where I would start. And then the second is, if you're not hosting a parent meeting at all throughout the season, absolutely. Just set an expectation that you will host at least one. And if you have had a parent meeting, have another one. Maybe you can have this one be specifically around sideline behavior. If you go to soccerparenting.com and if you go to our resources section, you can download a step-by-step guide to hosting a parent meeting in sports. And I would encourage coaches to do that and to gain confidence there. One of the really key components, and I'll break into this here, that we go over in that meeting is establishing boundaries. Because the coach-parent relationship is so confusing and so ill-defined, and some coaches are engaging parents more and others aren't. Parents aren't sure what to do right these days because they're being told to get more involved and get less involved and give your kids autonomy, but make sure you're engaged. Like, what does all of this really mean? What are we talking about? So there's so much confusion from a parent's perspective and how they should be showing up, because they don't want to be a helicopter parent. The last thing, level-headed parents, the majority of sports parents, the last thing we want to be perceived as is irrational and crazy. So, we're not quite sure how to show up. So with that in mind, a coach establishing boundaries is really, really important. This will lead to trust. This will lead to a heightened sense of community, and this will lead to a better coach-parent relationship. And so we talk and resource coaches around door open and door closed situations. How to be comfortable talking to parents is around, this is when the door is open and this is when the door is closed. And for coaches to reflect on those moments and decide, this is when it's okay for parents to talk to me, and I actually going to put some boundaries here and protect myself. And this is when it's not okay for them to come talk to me. And we're going to go over it in a parent meeting that is before there's a stressful situation or anything that might come up, so that we can come back to this in the future if we need to.
Of absolute gold, first names of all the parents. I love the flashcard idea as well.
Yeah.
I'm definitely stealing that, and set up parent meetings. I've done a few in the club where I work. And we asked the parents at the beginning of the season, is there anything we can do to help? What would be the things that you'd like to be the topics, the themes in some of our conversations? And we talked about helping your son or daughter come back from injury. Mm-hmm. We brought in a first team player as well, and their parent, and talked about the journey they'd been on and the experiences that they'd had. And I think from my own experiences, but talking to the other coaches, just creating more opportunity for dialogue feels really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And, I don't know if this is what you ran into, but usually when you ask parents, what do you want to learn more about? They're not sure. I was a couple years ago at Liverpool Academy, and I had a friend at Coaches with Academy. I was not brought in by Liverpool, but I was just at their training facility, their new facility, and I was up in the parent viewing room that they have that looks down on their turf pitches. These kids are playing. I'm listening to all the parents, hearing all this stress. And so I just couldn't help myself. And I introduced myself, and I had these little focus groups. It was awesome. But when I asked this group of moms that was there, what do you want to learn more about? They were crickets. They had no idea what they could do to learn about. And I think that's really important. for us to understand that there's a real gap in curiosity and understanding from a parent. And to be fair, since I started this work, despite my playing background and coaching background, I've learned so much. I didn't know about relative age effects 10 years ago. I didn't know about functional movement skills and the impact they had. I mean, I sort of understood that, but I didn't have the background and the understanding. So there's so much to learn. And I don't want to chime too much into this, but I'll just mention quickly our 6 pillars of sports parenting so that we can frame learning. And this might help coaches and parents listening think, I could learn more about that. But they're learning around the body, how growth impacts performance, relative age effect, like I mentioned, anything recovery from injury, protocols for return to play after an injury, preventing injuries, how kids develop and learning, building speed and power, the mind, the mental side of the game. We've had so many great people. Dan Abrahams from the UK has been on our site so many times. He's just so golden with his education. But as I mentioned before, parents are uniquely positioned to support a child with their mental side of the game. And so we resource parents a lot around how to help your child work through anxiety or work through a stressful situation with a coach or a player or work through tryout stress, which we have in the US. And then another area is the next level, how we support kids with big dreams, how you push and pull and when you show up as a parent and how you can support a child that's on a high performance pathway, which is a unique pathway for parents. And then parenting itself, car ride to, car ride home, how we're showing up in conversation with our children. The coach-parent relationship is another pillar, when to have a difficult conversation, how to have a difficult conversation with a coach, when your child should lead it, when you should be a silent observer, when there are red flags, how you address them. These are all like components that we're thinking about. And then our final area is the game itself. Parents needing to have a deeper understanding of the laws of the game, systems of play, whether that be with whichever sport. But parents, if they don't have a background in the game, learning about the game will certainly help.
I really like that last point about the game. I'm reflecting on myself now thinking, well, I've probably just had a perception that they get it, they understand it, where that actually might not be true at all.
Especially, I hear that in the work that I'm doing in Europe. Oh, this is football. And, of course, but surprisingly, a lot of parents have not played. They don't understand. Or I'm doing a big project now with Northern Ireland. And one of the themes that keeps emerging from that project is football is different now. So a parent who's on the sideline, the way they were raised in football and their experiences as a youth athlete are just we've come so far. There have been so many incredible improvements thanks to the work that you all did when you were with UK coaching, all these great coach developers we have, these improvements we're seeing in sports. Like, fortunately, the experience kids are having is much more conducive to learning. And so, sports are different now, and parents need to learn that, understand that.
Yeah, what a point. I think perhaps some parents will conflate what they experienced as being good, and therefore that's what their kids should experience. And obviously we've learnt loads about coaching and learning and teaching and yeah.
Absolutely. We've really thankfully come so far. And also, I think that's interesting that the coach the coach asked the parent, what do you think about your child's IDP? What are your opinions on that? And I think how a parent shows up and answers that question, especially in front of a child, is really, really important. So if I hear that a club's doing that, I would love to oh, wait, that's a great piece of content that we could develop to support parents in how you talk about IDPs in front of your child in order to help facilitate a sense of motivation, self-belief, growth mindset, all of these things with our children.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience recently doing those IDPs with some players that I'm coaching. And it was the sat around the table, it was mum or dad or mum and dad, the young girl who's 10, 11 years older than myself. And I positioned the feedback as, I'm going to share some ideas with you. And some of it you might agree with and some of it you might not. And both are absolutely fine. Let's have a conversation about what do you think? What do you make of this? And it felt much more healthy rather than I'm giving you feedback. It was generating conversation. Yeah. And then everybody just felt like they were involved in it rather than transmitting all this information to an 11-year-old where they won't remember half of it.
That's great. I love it. That's such a great way to show up. And now I can't help but mention the thing that is coming to my mind as you're saying that is just from a curiosity or for the coaches that are listening, just to be aware of this. Then what happens next year when that child has a different coach and they sit down for that meeting and the coach handles it totally differently than you did and maybe is really in their face and this is the way, or, is a totally different scenario. And can you just imagine how confusing that is for parents? And so one of the great things we've seen is just a really big movement for clubs to have better standards for meetings like that. Those are things that I'm really curious about. And I'm always asking clubs like, well, what are your standards around meetings that you have or that coaches have? Do you do any training for coaches on how to do IDPs? Because these are really important if we're spending all of this time. Like, what type of support are coaches getting? I think that generally in the UK, you all do a better job resourcing coaches around things like that than we do in the US with our coaches in the youth game.
There's two things in particular that I'd really like to ask you about.
Sure.
I feel like the structure for this podcast has gone out the window slightly, but we'll come to it.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's great conversation. And the more we talk, the more I feel like I want to ask. Car journeys and sidelines. They're two things that I'd love to talk about a little. Let's start with sidelines. You mentioned before we started recording your sideline project and some of the game day behaviours that parents will bring with them. Would you tell us a bit more about the work you've done and what you've noticed and how you're helping?
Absolutely. I'm so excited about the Sideline project. So this is a intervention that we've developed that is actually working. So this is well beyond like giving parents a lollipop so that they are quiet or doing a silent game day or play day, which I know is starting to come into the UK. We do those a lot in the US, which are good learning moments and reflection moments. But our course is actually changing behavior. So we've had thousands and thousands of parents that have taken this course. We survey parents 3 weeks after taking it. And 64.8% of parents say their behavior improved. 32% of parents say their relationship with their child improved as a result of a 15-minute course. And I think what's really important here, if there would be like one of the really key ideas that I want coaches to take away from this conversation is around silent behavior and framing it around supportive, distracting, and hostile. So this is part of the project I've been doing in Northern Ireland. So again, it's supportive, distracting, and hostile. And the aim of your meeting with parents and interactions with parents should be that parents can bucket their behaviors and they can say, that was distracting. I'm feeling a lot of stress. Or, oh, that was supportive. Good job. Or they can look at other parents and notice these types of behaviors. So we want parents to begin to be able to classify. And that's what the Sideline Project course does. It's a course that does not address very deeply hostile behavior. We all know that that needs to end. We all know that that needs to be eradicated from our games. And that's just a handful of parents that are participating in that type of behavior. So instead, we need to resource the majority of sports parents. And that's what our Sideline Project does, is it's resourcing the level-headed and sometimes stressed parents with information about what distracting behavior does to long-term cognitive growth and to player enjoyment. And so I would say I'm so proud of the Sideline Project and the impact that it's having, such potential for growth from that. It is a course that is being taken globally. We're just translating it into Spanish language. And then we also have a follow-up course for those parents that are hostile in nature or are a referee reported, a return to good standing course, which is like a 60-minute course. It's a little that long on purpose. It's supposed to be difficult to take. But we're seeing some really great feedback from that course as well, even from parents that have been hostile in nature, really demonstrating, remorse for their behavior and behavior change. So, and there is potential. So that's what I always try to say, is that there are things that are working. And I do think that education is the key to this, is that we find that once parents understand distracting behavior and what they think is helping, because it might help in the moment, you like tell your kid to pass the ball real quick and they do it and then they score a goal or shoot a basket or whatever. You think, I'm so glad I said that. But really, when parents understand that's not helping, then that makes a big difference. And when we stop the distracting behavior and lessen that, the sidelines are quieter, and then that hostile behavior is really obvious. And so those parents that have a tendency toward hostile behavior probably start the game distracting and then build to hostile. And so if we can just eliminate the distracting behavior from the majority of parents, I think we're on our way to improve sidelines. So that's that.
How would you go about raising a parent's own awareness of the behaviors that they show on the sideline?
Mm-hmm.
just to play this out for a second, those 3 buckets feel really, really helpful in terms of being able to name the behaviours which are happening. But what if a parent doesn't recognise that in themselves? They think the behaviour which is distracting is actually supportive.
Well, that's what we talk about in the course. So the course addresses that. The course is essentially most of it is a 10-minute, 11-minute video where I'm talking about these issues as well, specifically. Like, this is what supportive behavior is, and this is what distracting behavior is. And then we do, which actually I got from Dan Abrahams, we do the Stroop effect test. So parents participate in an exercise that's really on a deeper psychological level in a clinical setting. Obviously, this is not what that is, but it's designed to demonstrate how it feels to be distracted when you're trying to concentrate. And so parents feel what their child feels when they hear this distracting behavior. And that is a big moment of like the light bulbs going off for parents around changing their behavior. And hey, we're not gonna change everyone. It's not gonna be perfect, but I will say that we have probably around 30% of our partners are requiring a course now of parents when they register their child to play football. So that's a big shift. And the feedback we're getting from clubs that are requiring it, who are initially really nervous to do that, is like, oh my gosh, this has been fantastic. Everyone's so thankful and grateful. And I'm getting thank you emails from parents when they take the course instead of, why are you wasting my time emails? Like, the whole expectations that club leaders had around the course is like out the door. It's totally different. So we're seeing a lot of good change there. So I'm really, really excited about the Sideline project and the potential for positive change there.
Love that.
And then you asked about car ride home. Do we have time for that too? I know.
We do. Yeah. Car journeys. And I'll take back to my own experiences working at a club a few years ago. I just got this feeling that we could do some good work on the pitch, on the field. We could be really process driven with the players rather than outcome driven, strengths based with our coaching. And then in some cases, all that good stuff could get unpicked in the 15 minutes it took to get home. And we tried some things out almost as a bit of this feels like the right idea to help parents with. But again, it feels like a point which coaches can't control, but they can definitely influence, and would just be really curious about your perspective and experience on it.
Yeah. Well, personally, I will say this is where I kept failing as a parent. Like, the game would be over and I would, in my mind, be like, everything's fine. I would have feeling like I'm not feeling that stressed, or I had my idea of what I was going to say to my daughter. And then I would see her and I'd say something like, we really need to work on your left foot. And I'd be like, where did that come from? Like, I had no expectation that was going to come out of my mouth. I had so lack of understanding about the stress that I was actually feeling and where this was all landing. And so I will say that a lot of the work that we do needs to be like a deeper understanding for parents on their stress. There's been some really great new research on the German Bundesliga and the stress that parents in the academy programming there are feeling. Like, parent stress is real. And so how we handle that, I think, is really key. So my personal experiences has been, a lot of the work that I'm doing or did, especially with my daughter, was around seeking guidance and advice, because I was so shocked at how horrible I was showing up. And I wasn't being crazy. Maybe some people would classify it like that, but I always felt very rational about it. Actually, I was saying things to her that I would have been okay with somebody saying to me, but my mentality and my daughter's mentality is so different that what would have been good for me, like a real show of support and a plan and some exciting thinking, like, to her, it was so overwhelming. So that's where I think parents get it wrong. And education really helps here. Having really frank conversations. We have education for parents around car ride home, winning the car ride home, winning the car ride to practice, that getting out the door in a really not a stressful way so that you're going to your sporting experience without stress. There's nothing worse than screaming and yelling and getting into the car and everyone feeling like they're late and screaming about they don't have the water and whatever it might be. I hear from parents all the time how stressful those moments can be. So I think education and a plan and conversation and guidance and support for parents really is a big part of this. So if you address that at the club, I think, that was a great attempt to really support kids in coming to practice with a better mentality, leaving training, leaving games, and going home feeling supported from parents. So I think it's great that as a club, you made an effort towards that.
Nice. I've always wanted to find a master's student somewhere who wants to do a research project on this and put a GoPro camera up in the car and capture some of these conversations over a period of time and see what parents notice and hold some mirrors up and see where that goes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I hear from parents, and I remember feeling this, like getting in the car, going to the game. It's like maybe a game where it felt like a lot was on the line. And I'm like looking in the rearview mirror at my daughter, like, is she okay? Is she going to have a good game? What's she looking at? Is she listening to her music? Like, and I'm like, what is wrong with me? Like, what is going on in my head? And so I think, parents laugh when I tell these stories, and I speak them bigger than I think they really were. And my daughter hears them. She's like, Mom, you were so not over the top. But I'm like, well, I was feeling a lot more than I should have felt. And that made me be really curious about where that stress was coming from.
Yeah. Well, parents care and they want their kids to do well and have a positive experience. But I suppose sometimes the behaviors that emerge get in the way.
And it's a structural in nature too. The structures that kids are competing in these days, it does feel like a lot's on the line where, they do have to win that game in order to get into that tournament. And then it does feel like if you're in the tournament is then when you're going to get scouted. And like, it's like everything we're doing is so crazy around all of this. So this is not, I want to be really clear. Like, yes, I'm sharing about parents and we're talking about parents here, but the improvement to youth sports is bidirectional. It's collaborative. We all have ways that we can improve. But unless we address the parent issues, we won't ever reach our potential as a sporting world for these kids and providing kids with the environment that they really need. So, that's what we're attempting to do, is to really, really dive deep in parents and address them.
Skye, I'm going to honour the structure of the podcast.
Okay, good.
And I'm going to move on to the next section because I know that I like the structure. I don't know if anyone else does. I like the structure. So in every episode of the podcast, we invite our guests to add something to the game plan, which is a growing playbook of ideas and stories and memories, things for coaches to reflect and think on, but something really, really that you're bringing unique to you and your work and your experience. I wonder what you'd like to add.
Yeah. Well, I would say I dove into that a little bit. So things that I would want coaches to reflect on that I find myself is, just their internal bias around parents. Is that if we're really going to aim to make youth sports better, parents are a stakeholder. And so how are we treating them? And when we collectively look at some bias that we have, that might be legitimate bias. Let me just understand that we've had difficult situations. Some parents are irrational, but that's the point, is that it's just some parents. And I would just ask coaches to be curious and to reflect on the language that they use when they're referring to parents, and to not say, well, parents this way. Well, some parents are irrational, but the majority of parents are level-headed and are showing up great and trying hard for their child, are being a great sports parent. And so I think we really need to think about that, because what we're doing is just collectively putting all parents in this big bucket, and it makes parents feel like they don't have any agency in this space. And we need to give parents that agency so they have a sense of belonging, so that we can create community, so that our children do feel inspired. So I think it starts with our bias and perceptions and the language we use around parents.
You mentioned earlier that you've worked in lots of different clubs, with leagues, with national federations, with some of your work. You don't have to obviously disclose anywhere in particular, but where have you seen this done well, where coaches are thinking about parents as that stakeholder?
I am so proud of the project that we're getting close to wrapping up in Northern Ireland. So the IFA has done such an incredible job with their youth review, and the way this has come out, starting with this really well done survey of stakeholders in Northern Ireland and building into programming. And so they hired me on a project related to creating a culture of parent engagement in Northern Ireland. That what I'm so proud of, and I'll mention why they're doing it so well, is that I had such broad reach within the federation. We were working with coach developers. We rewrote coach education. We rewrote the club development officers and created programming for them, resourcing for clubs, their standards for clubs. Like this whole project they just did is really phenomenal. And Jordan Reed has been my primary contact there leading this project. And I just have to say, like, his leadership has been really phenomenal. And I think that I'll be really, really interested to see what football looks like at a grassroots level in Northern Ireland 2 or 3 years from now, because they've done and made really great strides. It helps when you're a country that size, when you think about the United States and how you start in the United States. But at the same time, I would say they're doing it really, really right. And the buy-in that they've had from leadership, from coach developers, from coaches, from club leaders who are coming along to these ideas around parent engagement has been really, really impressive. They're putting kids first.
You said coach education, and I was thinking when I was making some notes ahead of our conversation today, that phrase of nobody teaches coaches this stuff on a course, right? You don't get it. Like, courses are predominantly weighted around technical, tactical information, which I can understand why, but it probably gets too much of the spotlight, where these are the real points of pain. And you said earlier yourself, coaches where the anxiety around parents grows and grows and grows, it could be something that makes them, is the tipping point for them to leave coaching.
Absolutely.
So it being built into Coach Ed sounds sensible, if at least.
Yeah. And in Northern Ireland, they had a couple slides. They talked about parents. They had little breakouts, but they didn't have a collective focus on what the response was going to be to all the coaches' comments around parents. It's sort of the same thing that happened in the U.S. I'm a coach developer for U.S. Soccer, and in our grassroots courses, we used to have a slide on parent engagement, a single slide within our grassroots courses. I was just talking to Neil Ellis, who's in charge of these licenses now for U.S. Soccer, and they actually removed the slide because it sidetracked the whole course. The course was like a 2-hour in-person, and once that slide went up, they could have spent 45 minutes just talking about parent issues. And so they've removed it from the course, and now they're creating a specific module that is an extra course for coaches to take just on parent engagement. And I think that, there is a lot of simple resourcing around that and effective practices around parent engagement, ways that coaches can do it right. We have a course, Parent Engagement for Coaches. I'll give you a coupon code so that your members can receive a pretty substantial discount on that if you're up for that.
Yeah,
and,
great. Thank you.
It's a hour long, probably almost takes about 90 minutes to get through, but it's a very extensive course for coaches around parent engagement for coaches. It's an all sport course we have.
Super. Thank you. Big shout out to Jordan Reed at the IFA. Skye, final part of our conversation, final part of our podcast. I ask every guest for some game-changing advice for coaches and highlight the fact that this could be something that coaches might be able to pick up and try out and apply. They might want to think about what you say and edit it to suit their context or their coaching environment, or just reflect on it for now and see what comes of that. So have you got any game-changing advice for our coaches?
There's 2 things that come to mind right away. One is that, just to be very clear to everyone, this really starts, we talked about trust, but everything I'm talking about starts with self-trust. And so it's our feeling of efficacy as a coach, our confidence in our ability to impact children, to impact an environment. So I would really encourage coaches to think about self-trust and think about their integrity, their intent in terms of the work that they're doing, and reflect on that. But probably the other thing that I wanted to maybe dive into real quickly as we're wrapping up is to talk about boundaries, because we brought it up a lot. And, if coaches are brainstorming about boundaries and door open and door closed situations, I would say the door is open between a coach and a parent if a parent has a genuine question around the sport. What is that called? I don't understand that. Or the position my child's playing, I don't understand. What should be some of their focuses technically and tactically in this position? Or has a genuine question about the sport. The door's open. The door should be open if the parent is feeling a lot of unusual stress. Like they're stressing and car ride home is difficult, or like laying in bed at night, stressing about their child's sporting experience, the parent should go and talk to the coach. The coach should not be able to help, but the coach needs to be aware of that, because that's going to play into the child and their sense of inspiration. And then the coach can resource the parent with education and support as they can, but it shouldn't be the role of the coach to help a parent in that situation, just to be very clear. And the door should be open if there's a safeguarding issue, of course, that needs to be addressed between another player or bullying issue or something like that. But then the door is also really closed, and we need to be confident and comfortable saying to parents that the door is closed. You're not allowed to come talk to me about a technical decision or tactical decision I make in a game. If I do a certain substitution you don't agree with, if you don't like the starting lineup, like, I am the coach. This is what I do. I'm doing my best. A lot of times you're a volunteer, and you need to trust me. And so you're not allowed to come and talk to me about that. You're not allowed to come and talk to me about other players unless it's a bullying or a welfare issue. You can't ask why X player started when they didn't go to training on Tuesday. Like, that conversation is just not a conversation that I'm willing to have with you. And the door is closed if it's not convenient for me. I think it's important for coaches to be able to say, I'm rushing off to my family, or I have another training to get to, which is often the case. If it's not convenient for me, the door's closed and I'll set up a time that is convenient. So we need to be comfortable in those scenarios. And I just encourage coaches to try it out, because this is how we do establish trust. The research is clear that when we set boundaries, we see that boundaries come up in sense of community theory. We see boundaries come up in trust. We see boundaries come up in parent engagement, best practices. So it's really important that we feel comfortable in that. Our project in Northern Ireland, we actually created the boundary sheet and gave coaches and parents resources on what the boundaries of the relationship looks like.
So many incredible things in there. The door is open, the door is closed. And the examples you've given of when it should be open and should be closed, I think, are really helpful for coaches. I've got one final question, if that's okay, Skye.
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking about the parent who's also the coach.
Mm-hmm.
And is there anything that, from your experiences, you would just help those people be more aware of? What should they be thinking about? Because it's a really difficult line to tread. Because so many coaches get hooked into coaching because their kids play sport. And you said it yourself earlier, there's so many volunteers. And it's hard. It's really, really hard. And I find myself in this position where I see it coming upstream really soon, that my little boy is going to be playing under-7s football next year. And I know that at some point someone will ask me the question, would you like to coach his team? And of course I would, in many respects. But I don't want to get in the way of him having the best possible experience. So, what do you think to that?
So much of that is child driven. Some kids, my son loved me coaching his teams. My daughter, it was stressful for her. She was double thinking everything I said. She thought kids were getting mad at her if I used a coaching voice that wasn't perfect for her from her perspective. And this is when she's little, 7, 8. She had these strong feelings right from there. So I think we need to honor our children as far as that's concerned. So I think your instincts might be kicking in. I want to make sure they have a great experience. So Nick Levitt is a good friend of mine. He's been on our platform a lot, and we've actually done some really good content around parent coaching and parents coaching your children. And one of the things that he talks about with his son Callum is having a co-coach. And this comes up a lot in the work that we're doing. So, you have an agreement with another coach that, hey, you're going to do instruction to my child. And focus on them so that I don't put myself in that situation. And the other really thing that I think is really cool that a parent talked to me about once that they did, I've mentioned it a lot, I think this is interesting and important, is if you turn it on and off. So you have an actual ritual with your child when you get to training. Okay, now I'm a coach, and the ritual is a high five, whatever. And then you finish training and you get back to the car and you do a ritual so that you're going back into parent mode. Maybe it's walking around the car together and then getting in the door. It's like doing something fun and, a push-up with your child, whatever, just something that is a physical demonstration of the fact that, okay, now I'm back to being a parent. And you're always going to be the parent, which is, what comes up a lot in the conversations I have with people. Like, you can't just be a coach and not be a parent. You're always going to feel a tinge of connection to your child when you're out there coaching. And so just that deeper understanding and awareness. Where we run into a lot of issues is when coaches have preferential treatment around their child. And probably what happens and what might happen to you is the opposite. Nick talks about, I always put Callum in goal because no one wanted to be a goal. And so my son ended up always being a goal because that was just easier. So we sort of do the negative to our child. So, it's some things to consider for coaches and for parent coaches. But I do want to highlight that the parent coach is so vital to our sports organizations. And they do need to be resourced with conversation and education around this difficult nature of this relationship. So I love the fact that you brought this question up. And I do think there's a lot of opportunity for coaches to gain more confidence and understanding and learn to deal with their, stress that they might feel in those situations, which are unique. When you're coaching children, that you're friends with their parents, and then these are people you're social with or you see out and about in town, like that's just a whole different way of considering the role of a coach. And to bring it back to what I've mentioned a number of times is the self-trust.
It's the actual reality, I suppose, for so many people in grassroots
Absolutely.
sport. Skye, there's not many conversations I find myself in now, probably because I'm getting old, where there are so many ideas and nuggets and provocations that just feel so fresh and new. I've learned bucket loads listening to you and having a conversation with you today. And I genuinely mean that I've got pages and pages of notes.
Oh, you really do. Well, thanks, Tom. Thank you.
This has been awesome. And I know the people listening will value it massively. And just to recap on a couple of the headlines I've got written in front of me. Boundaries, working out the door open and the door closed moments. Trusting yourself. And then the parents that you work with, recognizing the internal bias that you might have around parents as that big group, the Sideline project and the 3 buckets of supportive, distracting and hostile behavior and helping coach.
There you go. We made progress today.
Yes. It was loads in here. The car journeys, the sidelines, and all the kind of the opportunity to reframe, to align and to look at this with real optimism. So much gold in here. Really inspiring. Thank you so much, Skye, for everything that you've shared.
Thank you for having me. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please follow the show and share it with a coach who might find it useful. I'd love to hear your feedback and any ideas you have for future guests. You can get in touch through the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening and go well in your next coaching session.